Hello, my name is Mike and this is my Noise Plethora build video. This video is not sponsored. I bought this kit with my own money and I wanted to start making build videos to share my experiences building various kits. I enjoy watching other people's build videos and after a year of building kits decided to start recording my own. I am not an expert and I do make mistakes, but if anything in this video helps you out, that's great. In this video, I'm building a Noise Plethora kit from Befaco. This is my 20th build. The majority of the modules I have built are from Befaco. Not every Befaco kit is suitable for first-timers, but I find that they are probably the best kits to get started with. Befaco kits include some of the best instructions I've come across, and their builds are usually straightforward and don't require a lot of second guessing. If you are thinking about building Eurorack modules from kits, or you already have experience building Eurorack modules and are thinking specifically about building a Noise Plethora kit, I hope this video encourages you. I do run into some problems in this video, but in the end I was able to complete this build, and the background music you are hearing is from my completed Noise Plethora module. So what I'm doing here is I'm using a multimeter to find out what resistance each grouping of components has. Now, normally people will use the color bands to figure that out, but long ago I kind of got tired of that and I started using a multimeter. Now, it happens that the instructions for the Befaco Noise Plethora suggest using a multimeter, and yeah, I fully endorse that. And you can see as I get a reading on each one, I'll write it in pen on the little cardboard tab, and I'll put a circle next to it on the checklist to check off later. That way I can keep track as I place and solder each resistor. My method here is to start with the lowest number of resistors. So in this case I got 2 resistors of which there's 1 each. I'm going to place and solder those first. I'm going to then go to groups of 2, groups of 3, groups of 4, etc. And then the last one I'm going to do are going to be the 100K resistors, of which there are 33. Now you can see I pulled out some needle nose pliers. For some reason these 1K2 resistors, it's almost like they're just slightly larger than all the other resistors. And I should mention, Befaco resistors are like half the size of most resistors you find. But these are just slightly off enough that I was having trouble getting them, pulling the legs through so that the resistor lied flat against the PCB, so I had to break out the needle nose pliers to pull those legs through and get the resistor lying flat. Here I'm showing my instruction sheet with all the check marks I make. As you can see, I cross off each resistor that I place and solder, and then once I have all the group of resistors done, I'll put a check mark in the circle I put next to it when I was taking inventory at the beginning. In the background music, the percussion you are hearing is coming from the Noise Plethora. The kick drum sound is the first noise generator with the filter all the way down, the resonance all the way up, and an envelope from the ornament and crime modulating the cutoff. The snare drum sound is the third noise generator with the white noise going through the filter, which is being modulated by a second envelope from the ornament and crime. The rhythms are being sequenced using a Muxlicer. The Noise Plethora board is unique in that it has a lot of these little vias. I'm pointing out, you see the normal through holes, and what I'm pointing to right now is a via. It's smaller than the normal through holes, and nothing goes in the vias. They are paths on the board from the top side to the bottom side to connect things. Here I'm pointing at two vias right next to a normal through hole. I've never seen a board with this many vias. And the concern there is sometimes your solder sputters. You can get solder in a via. That'll plug it up, and then you'd have to desolder it. The instructions do warn you not to create a solder bridge with any of the vias, but some of them are so close. I didn't run into any trouble with it, but I could see very easily how it could happen. Here I'm laying out the final 33 resistors. As you can see from the lighting, I quit one night and picked this up the next day. Alright, so the resistors are done, and now we're moving on to diodes. Of course, the trick with diodes is they are polarized. They have to face a certain direction. The stripe on the diode must match the stripe on the PCB. notice here that I solder one leg of each diode at a time. That's because diodes are sensitive to heat. You can burn them essentially. I've never had that problem, but then I've always been cautious about it because a lot of instructions will warn you about that. These are ferrite beads. You use an old resistor leg that you cut off. You put it through the hole of the ferrite bead and you solder it to the board. The purpose of a ferrite bead, I believe, is to filter out any noise that would be caused by the electrical components of the module, so they don't bleed over into the audio portion. Now I am placing IC sockets. I will solder one pin of the IC socket and then I will check to make sure it's lying flat. You can see that one wasn't, so I kind of held it up and pressed on it with my finger while I resoldered the one leg so I could get it flat. Using your finger for that is not recommended. In my case, it just so happens I have very calloused fingers from years and years of playing guitar and bass. Most people will use a piece of plastic or foam to hold the IC socket down while they solder it from the other side. Now I'm opening up bag B, that is the capacitors and pin headers and sockets. I'm trying to dig out only capacitors, but at a certain point that became impossible, and I just had to take out all the pins and sockets in order to get at my capacitors. We have non-polarized capacitors mostly, but then we also have the polarized electrolytic capacitors. Those have to be oriented a certain way. They have a longer leg and a shorter leg. The longer leg is positive and there will be a marking on the board for positive, so you just gotta make sure the longer leg goes into the positive hole. Now I'm just sorting all the different types of capacitors. Non-polarized ones first. You can see there's ceramic capacitors, but there are also the box-like film capacitors. Those film capacitors are used in audio circuits. They're extremely low noise. I actually replaced some ceramic capacitors in a distortion pedal with film capacitors, and it was quite a difference. And even though you do want noise in distortion, there's a difference between good distortion type of noise and electrical noise humming in your line. So film capacitors prevent that. Now we're moving on to the electrolytic capacitors. These are polarized. The long leg is positive and needs to go into the hole with a plus sign next to it. Once again, I'm doing one leg at a time, just like the diodes. Electrolytic capacitors are also prone to heat damage. Right here, I'm pointing out that one of the vias is really close to one of the electrolytic capacitor legs, and it would be very easy to accidentally bridge that connection right there. Regulators. There are two voltage regulators. The larger one is a 5-volt voltage regulator. The smaller one is in a transistor style package. And you can see I'm kind of slowly doing one leg at a time and then taking a pause before moving on to the next leg. These are also prone to being overheated, so I'm just being extra cautious. I've never actually overheated a voltage regulator before or a transistor, but it's something to be cautious for. Doing the power pin, and you will notice I'm being extra cautious here. It looks like I'm about to start, but then I think better of it. I grab the power cord that came with the module, and I just kind of test it to make sure if I put it in on the keyed side, will my red stripe be on the correct side of the PCB. After the power connector, the instructions say to place the ICs in their sockets, but I prefer to put that off till the last minute, so instead I skip to the next step, which is to separate the boards. Initially I try cutting along the perforated lines with a utility knife blade, but this doesn't really get me anywhere. Next, I try a wire cutter. Finally, I use my needle nose pliers to just kind of break it apart, and this ends up being the way that works. It doesn't feel right. It definitely feels like you could break something, but luckily nothing that wasn't supposed to break off broke off. You can see I'm having a hard time because if you look closely at this PCB, it's simultaneously connecting between the two boards as well as this rather large chunk across the top of both boards. And finally, it all comes apart. Some wire cutter to get rid of the parts that are overhanging. Now, you see a little bit of the dust on my work mat, but there's a lot more than what showed up on camera. And then I decide to take a break. I use a Clorox wipe to wipe up all the PCB particles on my mat, and then I wait a while so that it dries out. And now we're placing the connectors. These are the connectors that connect the two boards, and they lie parallel on top of each other. Now, I like to place the connectors, connect the boards, and then solder them in place. This way, I ensure that they line up correctly before I solder them. I pull them apart again. At this point, it would be perfectly okay to start placing the ICs and their sockets on the main board. I'm pretty much done with that one. Now for the control board, I have the Teensy microprocessor and the Befaco Codec up next, and I'm looking and I'm realizing if I don't place this IC now, I'm probably going to have a hard time with it if I try it later. So the instructions actually refer you to a website to review a video on this part. I had watched the video before and was pretty sure I understood it, but you'll see me, I'll kind of put everything in place and then I'll stop again. You can actually see a moment where I stop and think, and then I decide to put it all away, stop for the night, and pick it up again the next day. So with the Teensy, first you put down the sockets, then you put the header pins into the sockets, and then you put the Teensy on top of the pins. And you just solder the four corners first, just to secure the Teensy to the header pins. Then we flip it over, and this is where we solder the sockets into place, making sure that they're flat. And then once that's secured at the four corners, we finish soldering the Teensy to the header pins. I've dealt with the Teensy one other time. It was when I did a micro ornament and crime build. Teensys are neat, but the problem is they involve Pogo pins. These are spring-loaded pins. They get placed. Oh, right here I'm showing that the little ceramic capacitor is blocking the Pogo pin placement. So I get some tweezers, and I actually have to push it with the back side of the tweezers to get it out of the way so I can place the Pogo pins. And I've had nothing but problems with Pogo pins. The first time I soldered a Pogo pin to an ornament and crime board, it got too hot, the spring expanded, and it shot the top half of the pin out of the bottom half. Luckily, with the micro ornament and crime, you only need the Pogo pin if you have certain power supplies, and I did not have one of those power supplies, So at the end of the build, I really didn't need it. So I just soldered in the Pogo pin, and I'm going to mention right here, it's not soldered well enough, and that's going to cause a problem later. Now I'm soldering down the Befaco codec to its header pins. Next up, we're connecting three-way switches. There's also a two-way switch mixed in there. Next up, the instructions say to place the spacers. Now the problem is I have 3 spacers and only 2 nuts. At first, I thought there were only 2 places for spacers, so I kind of looked at it like, oh, I got a free spacer. But I didn't realize there's that center hole for it, kind of towards the top of the board. Next, the instructions have us doing the mini jacks. Now the instructions say place them, make sure they're flat, and solder them all. Normally, I don't like soldering mini jacks until I have the front panel on. So what I do in this case is I decide to attach the front panel with just the mini jacks on, solder them into place, and then take the panel off again. In hindsight, I kind of wish that what I did was just place these, moved on to the next steps, and then once it was time to put the front panel on and solder the potentiometers and everything, just solder the mini jacks at that point as well. I don't quite see the advantage of soldering the mini jacks before even placing the potentiometers. Alright, so now we're placing the potentiometers, and you can see I do 2 of them before I decide to pull them off. I was concerned about the legs of all the IC sockets and pin header sockets and connectors making contact with the bottom of the potentiometers. So I started trimming them down. As I watch this, it kind of dawns on me, this might be where I messed up my Pogo pins for the Teensy. It's possible that my soldering job was good enough originally and I wouldn't have had any problems. But then, when I trimmed it, maybe that's when I went wrong. It's impossible to say, but yeah, watching this now, I think I went a bit overboard and got a bit too zealous in flattening out those pins. So this is cutoff 1. This is the first potentiometer where you actually have to remove one of the location lugs in order for it to fit. This is the one that covers the Pogo pins. So once this potentiometer, this cutoff 1, is soldered into place, you can't reach most of the Pogo pins anymore. These little windows for the LED number displays, they have a blue covering on both sides. You have to make sure to peel both sides off. And then the instructions tell you to either hot glue or tape them to the back of the panel. All I had on hand was Scotch tape. Probably not the best thing to use for this. I saw another YouTube video where the guy used the clear part of a Befaco sticker that came with the kit. That's probably a much better idea that I'd recommend. With the mini jacks soldered into place, I actually find myself having a hard time placing the front panel. So you see me struggle with it a little bit before it finally slides on. First, I solder the LED just to get those long legs out of the way. Soldering the potentiometers into place. This one is right up against the Befaco Codec pin sockets. Even though my iron is touching the opposite side away from the black plastic socket, I can still smell melting plastic. So I pull away for a second and then go in again, hoping to reflow the connection without melting any more plastic. Now I'm soldering the LED number displays into place. I keep checking the front to make sure that they're lined up properly, because once they're soldered into place, there's no going back. Now I'm placing all the ICs. You can see I put a screw into the spacer on the main board, and then that's just gonna float where it's supposed to be secured by a nut on the control board. I figure if I have 2 of the 3 secured by a nut, it should be fine, and so far it's holding together. Now I'm testing the power connector, making sure there are no shorts. And then I test it. Now I see right away that I don't have the second display lit up. Later on during troubleshooting, I will find that the culprit is a bad solder joint on one of the Pogo pin legs. I still test it for sound. I don't yet fully understand how the third section works. The white output just outputs white noise without the filter. The filtered one in the middle is the one that the filter affects, and then there's a two-way switch right above it where you can either have it set to the white noise or the gritty. Now my gritty jack is a bit tight, but eventually I'm able to get a cable in there. It's still a bit tight, but at the end of the day, I figure it's not worth trying to desolder and replace it. It's good enough. Now I'm getting sound out of noise generator 2, even though the LED is not lit up. Noise generator 1 works great. And I know that trying to switch the knob between which noise generator it affects isn't going to cause my bottom display to light up, but I'm just kind of desperately trying anything, because troubleshooting and fixing things is a whole other process, as you will see. Alright, so now we are taking the 2 PCBs apart, and my first try at troubleshooting is just to literally reflow everything. It seems like a long shot, but when I built a ripples kit, I had no resonance at first, and then I just reflowed every connection, and just like that it worked. So off camera, I brought this upstairs and tested it. Reflowing without pulling everything apart did not work. So now I'm pulling off the panel, getting at everything I can. I am double checking the Teensy to make sure the Pogo pins line up. I am pushing Pogo pins around, which probably isn't advisable. I am resoldering the Pogo pin connections that I can reach, but of course neither of those are the ones I need to reach. Very carefully, very gingerly pushing the Teensy back down on the Pogo pins. Alright, I brought it upstairs and tested it again, still no luck. So I think we're at the stage of the night where I was recording things when I was away from my desk, and I wasn't recording things that I meant to record. So what happened that's missing here is I ended up cutting, well, first I tried desoldering the cutoff potentiometer, cutoff 1, and that didn't work. So I ended up cutting the legs off. You can see that potentiometer there without legs. And what I'm doing is I'm attaching flying wires to it in lieu of legs. But of course I still have solder and the old legs in the holes. So I am now using a solder pump and wick over and over again, trying to clear those holes so I can get my wires through them. At this point, I have tested the module without the cutoff, and the bottom LED did light up. So I know I'm on the right track, otherwise I wouldn't have put this much work into just this one step. Now, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, when I tested this board without the cutoff knob there at all, I didn't get any sound out of Noise Generator 1. So I am kind of taking it on faith that once I put the potentiometer back, I'll get sound, and sure enough, I do. Here I'm putting the front panel back on because off camera I just tested it and everything worked. Here I'm trying to show off my hack. I'll have a better shot of it later. But you can see the purple flying wires there. Alright, and there you see both LED displays are lit. The cutoff knob works perfectly. It is just held on by the nut on the front panel, which isn't exactly great, but so far so good. Here I test out Noise Generator 2, and everything works as it should. Still struggling with that gritty jack. but I have no trouble getting gritty sounds through the filtered setting. Now I'm setting up to use maths as an LFO to modulate some of the X and Y settings on the second noise generator. Now I'm going to modulate the program setting. This ends up being one of my favorite things to do with the noise plethora. Now I'm testing out the first noise generator. Oh my gosh. And a little honest in-the-moment reaction there. Alright, now to put the knobs on. I put 2 knobs on here, and then I want to get a better look at my hack job. You can see some melted plastic there on the shrouds. You see my purple wires. Yeah. Not the greatest, but it works. And then we resume putting the rest of the knobs on. So that is my noise plethora build video. If you actually made it this far, if you watched the whole thing, thank you very much. If you want to see more of this kind of content, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know, and have a wonderful day.